Happy early 4th, the day before July the 4th. Sorry for the late start. Had a couple of confusing things happen before we were able to get going. There was just some issues, but we are now off and running with Off the Hook. This is Caleb Calhoun. Yes, I'm still hosting for now. We will not have a show on the 4th, and then we will return on the 5th. Sorry, Travis and Rocky Thomas, you guys on asking about the show. Yes, there is a show today. We got a lot to get to. Again, there was just some technical issues before we could get it going. Sorry for the late start. We're going to talk a little bit today about the Braylon Staley commitment. Also, did Tennessee football do what it needed to do on the recruiting trail in June with Braylon Staley's commitment? It's kind of a pretty big pickup for the Vols, but they still haven't addressed some key positions. We're going to get into that. In the second block, we're going to talk a lot about Pro Football Focus ranking the Vols quarterback room top 10 in the nation, but then being left off the teams with the best chance to push for the college football playoff in 2023. And then we're going to kind of raise this question, and I'm going to see what you guys' thoughts are on this, which is that how can we be sure Josh Heupel isn't like Gus Malzahn or Kevin Sumlin, which is a concern if you think about it. Offensive coaches who made a splash early and then filtered off. There were some who lasted like Steve Spurrier, but there could be others who are a little bit different. So ready to get off and running. Let's start with the news of the weekend. And it happened on Friday, right after we did our show, funny enough. Tennessee football added a 4-star wide receiver in Braylon Staley. The receiver comes from Aiken High School, which is in Aiken, South Carolina, which is the county seat of Aiken County. He chose the Vols over North Carolina and Miami. And Clemson was one of his favorites, but the receiver room got so loaded, he decided to look elsewhere. Staley was the 4th commitment for the month of June for the Vols. That gives their recruiting class, I'm looking it up now, but if I'm not mistaken, they have 15 recruits now for their 2024 recruiting class. Yes, they have 15 recruits, and they picked up 4 in the month of June alone. The most key of those 4 was Boo Carter, the one that everybody had been talking about for a while, the athlete, 6 feet 180. He's listed as a 4-star receiver on Rivals, but he's actually a 4-star athlete everywhere else, and he'll actually probably play defensive back. Meanwhile, Jordan Burns, coming out of Atlanta, was their other commitment. They also picked up Max Anderson out of Texas. I think that was their biggest commitment, Max Anderson. I thought that was a huge one for them, the offensive lineman out of Texas. And then Braylon Staley to close it out. Now, they did have a loss on the trail, and that was J.J. Harrell, who decommitted from them in early June. So we kind of wrote about this back, I want to say back in early June. We had a story that June was going to somewhat be Josh Heupel's make or break month. He needed to recruit well in June because here's the thing about Tennessee. Here's what we were talking about for a while. Tennessee has the NCAA investigation, has the issues ongoing that are plaguing them, and 2024 is going to be the first class that they can build for the future. We'll get to that in a moment. Let's talk about Staley first, though. Staley, it was kind of odd that he committed. Caleb Jaru and I talked about this last week because, Mike Matthews is still on Tennessee's radar and people like that. Staley looks more like a slot receiver, given his size at 6 feet. He is, as Gabe Brooks wrote on 247 Sports and Jaru quoted, lean athletic build with a nice size catch radius that combines with consistent hands catching acumen to expand the catch window. Big play athleticism shows in the vertical passing game and as a contested catch weapon. It's exactly what you want in Josh Heupel's system. That's literally what you want, is a guy that can make the big play and that can dominate and can win on vertical routes. And so from that perspective, Braylon Staley is a huge pickup for Tennessee football. I mean, a gigantic one. Another point about him is, quote, he excels as a high-pointing target and in-back shoulder opportunities thanks to athleticism, timing, and body control adjustment ability. He finds the boundary and regularly gets a foot in when it's not easy to do so. Accelerates quickly and plays with above-average top-end speed, especially when allowed a runaway. Strong multi-sport profile, includes multiple South Carolina 4-way track and field championships, can more consistently create late separation, more explosive in linear situations than lateral, and show some redirecting gear down. This is literally what you want in Josh Heupel's system. This is what Jalen Hyatt was. He may not be the quickest when it comes to 40 times or off the jump or things like that. However, he can accelerate and he can get separation late, and on these vertical routes, that's exactly the type of receiver you want in the system. So even though there were some other wideouts Josh Heupel is targeting, and they're going more for size and they're going more for winning one-on-one matchups and advantages like that, it is a big deal that they could land somebody like Braylon Staley. They need somebody like Staley to be able to handle everything that's going to be thrown at them, because it's key to have a strong go-to wideout and a dangerous slot guy in this system. You had everybody talked about Jalen Hyatt last year, but the year before you had Velus Jones Jr. Without Jones, Cedric Tillman isn't a 1,000-yard receiver. That's a huge deal. Tillman and Jones needed to complement each other together. Hyatt was effective because even though after Tillman went down, Brew McCoy and Ramel Keaton were huge assets for Tennessee on the outside. So even though Jeru and I were both a little shocked about Staley's commitment, given what Tennessee is going after at wideout, it does kind of make sense, because if you're a slot receiver, you take a chance going to Tennessee, because if you can get into that starting role, you're going to get a lot of balls thrown your way, and you're going to get schemed open plenty of times just due to your speed alone. And you've got to give a lot of credit to Heupel and his staff for landing a guy like Braylon Staley. Now, does he feel the exact needs of Tennessee? No, because Tennessee is still pretty loaded at wide receiver, despite what was said about them last year on 3. They have pretty good depth at the receiver room. They could have gone this whole class without a wide receiver, quite honestly. Squirrel White still there. Dante Thornton still there, who can play on the inside and the outside. Ramel Keaton will be gone probably, and Brew McCoy probably will too after this year, but you still got Nathan Leacock. But at the same time, so as far as slot receivers go, this probably, Staley isn't a necessary pickup, but he does give them more options long-term in the slot. Largely because, again, we don't know what's going to happen with Squirrel White and Dante Thornton down the road. So this is a still pretty good pickup. And Heupel doesn't have to load up at receiver too much. Again, he runs 2 to 3 guys max in a regular year, which is a philosophy I've always believed in. I never understood the rotating in and out. That was a Butch Jones philosophy, hence the reason Marquez North never lived up to his freshman year hype. So I think it's a good thing to have one go-to guy at wideout, one go-to guy at slot, and then another reliable guy at wideout on the other end. And those are your 3 receivers, and that's how you go about it. And Braylon Staley, could fit into that pretty well. Also, let's look at who he was targeting. So he was looking at Clemson. Tennessee getting him over Clemson is not the best sign for Tennessee, not largely because of why he didn't pick Clemson. It was very clear he backed out of Clemson because he was worried about the depth of the receiver room. But he did pick Tennessee over North Carolina and Miami. And Miami has a NIL collective right on par with Tennessee. So if we're going to talk about NIL and the power of NIL, Miami is right there. So for Tennessee to beat out Miami, that stands out. That really does, for them to beat out North Carolina. I know North Carolina isn't a blue blood in football, but with Mac Brown there and him being from the Carolinas, that does stand out. So Tennessee got a win on the recruiting trail with the addition of Braylon Staley, and he is going to help them a lot when it comes to depth, when it comes to things they need. So all in all, I can't really criticize this pickup, even though I was a little shocked. We found out early last week on ESPN that Tennessee was going to have Braylon Staley committed. That Tennessee was the favorite to land Braylon Staley. That was one of the predictions. And that's where the shock came through because, again, Mike Matthews, people like that still out on the trail. And those are the bigger deals. Those are the guys Tennessee really needs to get because McCoy and Keaton will probably be – after this year, Tennessee's going to have a brand new crop of wideouts they're going to have to look at. Because, remember, Dante Thornton is more of a slot guy. They can move him to wideout, but he's not proven there. Brew McCoy and Ramel Keaton will both probably be gone, so they can maybe move Thornton, and then they could hope that Nathan Leacock emerges, but there's still Caleb Webb, Chaz Nimrod, but they got to find other guys just to be sure, and that's not really clear if they have that yet. So all in all, to be fair, this is a good pickup, but it doesn't solve the biggest needs for Tennessee football, even in the receiver room. And that's going to be the question for them long term is how can they make sure that they have They got enough depth at wide receiver right now. That's not an issue, but how can they be sure that they have enough depth long term? That's something we're going to touch on going down the road. So that also leads us to our next topic, which is it has to do with Tennessee and recruiting in June. So in case you don't know, Tennessee, as we wrote and we talked about a little bit in the last segment, Tennessee had a huge recruiting month in June in terms of what it needed to do. There was a lot of expectations on the Vols going into 2023, but this was the first year we felt that they could recruit with the credibility of Josh Heupel, given what they've done. So the question becomes, did they do what they needed to do on the recruiting trail in June? And that's a big question, because here's what you need to understand. And again, I encourage you guys to all go back and look at Dave Hooker's article on this in early June, because this was the real story at that time. In case you forgot, Tennessee, Josh Heupel's biggest recruiting month was June, because June is always a big recruiting month now for the next class. 2024 is his most crucial recruiting class. It'll be the first class that he puts together with the credibility of the success that he's had at Tennessee. And it will be the one that builds what they can do long term, because what they've been doing so far at Tennessee is, and we can just say this, we know this from reports, opening the NIL checkbook and lowering the transfers they need and the specific talent they need for Josh Heupel to be able to run his system to build the credibility he needs to be able to then go recruit the 4-year guys. This is the year that he needs to recruit the 4-year guys that can fully build and stack his roster. And he specifically needs to focus in the trenches. Taking that into account, I'm going to say right now, Josh Heupel's recruiting for June is incomplete. Look, June was the one that you wanted him to get all the big commitments on, but Tennessee is still in the running for a lot of big fish who chose to not commit in June this year, which is a little bit shocking. It's just a little bit delayed. So even though on paper, Heupel did not do what he wants to do in June, there's just no way around that. Tennessee did not do what it needs to do on the recruiting trail in June. There's still plenty out there for them to be excited about. I mean, they already got an early start with Jordan Burns and Max Anderson. Those are two solid pickups, particularly Max Anderson on the offensive line. That's a huge pickup for Tennessee football. I can't stress that enough coming out of Texas. 6'5", 305 roughly pounds. I think he's probably, if he puts on more weight and maintains his quickness, he'll play outside, but he's more of an interior offensive lineman. But that's fine, because Josh Heupel's system, interior offensive linemen are very crucial because of the running game that he relies on so heavily. So Max Anderson is a big pickup. He needs like 3 more of those, honestly. And luckily for him in Tennessee, the expectations we put on them to be able to recruit this way in June have now been modified, because there are just so many people that Tennessee is targeting right now that have not made their commitment and won't make their commitment until later, probably this month. So we're going to have to see how that goes. Now, as for where they stand in the SEC, Tennessee is 4th. Georgia's number 1, Florida's number 2, and LSU is number 3, according to the 247 Sports Composite. I will say that specifically is not a bad sign for Tennessee. And the reason that specifically is not a bad sign for Tennessee is none of us really think Florida's recruiting is going to last. I think Florida was struggling because of decommitments and the NIL disaster that happened with Jaden Rashada. And Billy Napier made a push to get all the guys he has that were silent commitments, but not vocal commitments. He made a push for them to go ahead and make their commitments so Florida could get some momentum on the trail. I think they're slowly but surely going to sink down the list. Ohio State got a big pickup on the trail the other day. Florida is still doing okay. They moved back ahead of Michigan after falling to 4th. They're back up in 3rd. But it's really down to Georgia and Ohio State on the trail over who has the best recruiting class in college football right now. Florida, 3rd. Clear-cut 3rd, but not a distant 3rd. And then Michigan is a distant 4th, and everything else is pretty distant after that. But again, I think that's all going to work itself out. Florida won't stay where they are. Trust me on this. Michigan 4th, USC 5th, Notre Dame 6th, Penn State 7th, Oregon 8th, LSU 9th, and Tennessee 10th. So the verdict is in on paper. They didn't do what they needed to do. We have to say that. We have to call it what it is. Tennessee needs 2 or 3 more trench players on both sides of the ball for us to say that this class was what they needed in the summer. And they just don't have that. They got one guy in the trenches. Now, right at Tom, you bring up a good point. There's the offensive tackle war. There's a couple offensive linemen that Tennessee could still go after that they are still targeting. And that's why I gave this an incomplete. There are edge rushers there are guys like Elijah Rushing too on the defensive side that they're still targeting. A lot of guys that just haven't committed yet that we thought that typically do commit in June, but just have decided not to. And this could be a good sign for Tennessee. Maybe they're targeting bigger fish now, meaning their great recruits will come later in the year because some of the better players typically commit a little bit later than the other ones. And Odd Sports says you don't want to do like Florida and throw NIL at players and forget your current roster. Odd Sports, that is absolutely true to a degree. I think it's fine to throw NIL at players. You just have to make sure you have your NIL money at line, which Florida does not have. And so we can't really say for sure exactly how this is going to end up and what's going to play out. But what we can say is that as of right now, Tennessee has some issues that aren't long-term issues yet that could be addressed, but you need the month of July to do it. And so what was June as the most crucial recruiting month for Heupel has now been expanded into June and July. And without both of those months, again, if you get to August and you don't have some commitments, you got a real concern. I mean, guys, you have a real concern there if that happens. Tennessee football needs to pick up some guys, and they need to pick them up fast because there were some, not just to mention, yes, they have a top 10 class right now, and it's fourth in the SEC. But Alabama is not going to stay down at number 22. Again, when you talk about big fish to fry, Alabama gets their commitments a little bit later. They're going to shoot up. Texas A&M has a large NIL collective. They're number 12. Now, I personally think the bottom's going to fall out of Texas A&M this fall, which will help, but we don't know that for sure. Clemson is right on Tennessee's tail at number 11. And honestly, in terms of commitments, I would argue Clemson has a better class. Clemson has 9 4-stars, 2 5-stars. Tennessee just has 10 4-stars and 5 3-stars to Clemson's 2 3-stars. I think that's a little bit ridiculous to look at that and say that Tennessee's class is better. That's just on raw numbers alone. So honestly, when you look at this class all the way down, Tennessee probably has it's probably tied with Texas A&M for the 11th best class. Tennessee and Texas A&M were probably number 11. And then right on their tail, there's still South Carolina with 8 4-star commitments. There's Florida State with 9 4-star commitments and a 5-star commitment. So Florida State might have a case over. Actually, they do have a case over Tennessee. So honestly, Tennessee's probably closer to 12th in this class. So Tennessee has a lot of work to do on the trail, and that makes July a major recruiting month. So we're going to have to pay attention to that long term, because if Tennessee doesn't have to have, I've said this for a while, they don't have to have a top 5 class to win championships. Heupel can scheme out of a class at maybe 5 to 7 range or top 10. He can out-scheme teams with better recruiting talent than he's got. But the gap can't be too large. So the gap, it can't be he's facing Georgia with the number 1 class or Alabama with the number 2 class, and he's got the 20th class, okay, or the 15th class. It's got to be in the 5 to 7 range. 8 to 10 is pushing it, man. 8 to 10 is pushing it. So like 7 is that magic number. You got to get to that top 7 class, and he's not there right now. And that's what makes July such a crucial month, is if he doesn't get there, then there are going to be many issues going forward. Portions of the program brought to you by crafttreats.com, portions of the program brought to you by Craft Treats. Crafttreats.com is your home for the best pet treats in the world. They even have CBD-infused treats that can minimize your pet's digestive, arthritic, or anxiety issues. Go to crafttreats.com. When we come back, it's a little bit of an odd day, as the day before the 4th, but we're going to talk a little bit about a few fun lists that were made over the weekend. One regarding Tennessee's quarterback room based on PFF grades, and another regarding a level of disrespect they got from On 3. Stick with us. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
And Craving Wings South North Shore location, where we've heard people say that you can get the best wings in East Tennessee. Pero ¿quién es este? El número 87, Jacob Warren.
I'll just do 6 on my sauce 87, please.
Imposible, señorita. Dale 6 más. Look at these wings. Perfectas, deliciosas, fantásticas.
Man, I don't know what you're saying, but it sounds awesome. How do you say fresh, never frozen in Spanish?
Frescas, nunca congeladas. Make your way to Craven Wings and get you seis más.
But what was funny about Cadis, we were a full continuum of care at that time. We had detox, we had inpatient, we had outpatient. So we were doing a lot of the things that we do now. But now we just do them so much better. It's really a simple program, but we're complicated people. I am what I am, and now I got to do something about it.
You can take your life back. Call Cadis today.
Got cataracts? We can fix that. Never miss another moment. With a little help from Doctors Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn at cctis.com.
Do you want to own the more that owns every job? Then get to Vassey Lawn and Garden in Cleveland and get you a Toro. I'm David Vassey, here to talk to you about Toro. With a Toro Zero Turn, you'll get more out of every minute and you'll reach the finish line faster. At Vassey's, we like to say, no matter if you're mowing 3 acres a week or 11 lawns a day, homeowners and business owners alike find confidence in equipment they can trust from top to bottom.
Vassey Lawn and Garden, Highway 60 North in Cleveland.
Man alive, it's worth the drive.
Our family has been creating jewelry since 1986, each piece unique with a story all its own. I'm Rick Terry with Rick Terry Jewelry Designs. I'm a jeweler, and I want to be your jeweler. We're grateful that you chose us to be Knoxville's best jeweler. My family and staff look forward to serving you. So please come see us. Kingston Pike and Campbell Station Road in the heart of Farragut and downtown on Gay Street, right next to the Tennessee Theater.
Welcome back, everybody. We are having a pre-4th show. Again, a reminder, we will not have a show on the 4th. So we will be back on the 5th. My apologies again for starting a little bit late today. Odd Sport brings up if Tennessee can beat Florida again, that should take care of it. It's not going to be easy. It's still 50-50 because history. I don't think it should be 50-50 this year. I think Tennessee should handle Florida pretty easily. If they don't handle Florida this year, that's a really, really big red flag for where the program is going long term. That's almost a must win for them. They got to prove that when the programs are at this different level, there's this much gap between them right now that they can win that game. So that's going to be a big deal long term about Tennessee beating Florida. Going to move on a little bit. Had a couple of interesting stories that happened over the weekend, starting with Pro Football Focus. We talked to you guys about this last week, how they had Wesley Walker as as the SEC's highest grading returning safety, a good sign for Tennessee football's defensive backs. Well, another story that it came out earlier than that, but it's kind of making its rounds now, so we want to get to, is PFF's ranking of QB rooms. Now, remember, PFF uses a lot of, should we say, analytical data to do this, so it's much more objective than other rankings, and that's why this matters. So it ranked Tennessee at number 7 in terms of the best quarterback rooms in the country. Now let's look at who's ahead of them real quick. USC number 1, LSU number 2, Texas number 3, Ole Miss number 4, Oregon number 5, and Washington number 6. Now real quick, anybody want to say what those programs all have in common? What makes Tennessee different? Just looking at the message boards. Anybody want to say what those programs have in common? Giving you guys a chance. Nobody wants to respond. I can go ahead and jump in. All right. What they all have in common is that they all have returning starters at quarterback. Now, you're going to say Joe Milton's a returning starter at quarterback, but guys, he's not really. He started 2 games last year, and he finished one other one, and he started 2 games in 2021. So he has starting experience. He's not really a returning starter for Tennessee. Hendon Hooker was their quarterback. But this PFF list shows that Tennessee has the highest grade, is the highest graded team, has the highest graded quarterback room of any team without a returning starter. Georgia's right behind them at number 8 as they got to replace Stetson Bennett. But I think Tennessee being up here is a bigger deal given how much is put on the quarterback room. Oklahoma's number 9, North Carolina's number 10. Both have returning starters. I would argue that and PFF did say that Drake May's the best returning quarterback in college football as far as North Carolina at number 10, but it's about the options behind him. There's not a lot of depth. See, for Tennessee, and this is a big thing now, the Milton-Nico room together matters. Joe Milton and Nico Iamaleava. According to PFF, now this is kind of an interesting point. It's not something that's too shocking, but PFF actually tracked Milton's arm strength. Quarterbacks with at least 100 dropbacks in 2022, which apparently Milton did have 100 dropbacks. Milton led all quarterbacks with an 11.1% big-time throw rate, which tracks your conversions on big passes and deep balls and things like that. They also have the top 10 recruit in Nico Iamaleava, who possesses, quote, according to PFF, the best physical tools of any quarterback in the 2023 class. Travis, I want to push back. This is a very interesting point you bring up. I'm going to show it for you because it's actually intriguing, where you say these are just like political polls. They aren't worth the paper they're written on. Fair enough. I understand. That's a very fair point. A lot of people bring up last year's midterm elections and the 2016 presidential election, and honestly, to a degree, the 2020 presidential election to talk about how polls don't matter as much. No, but here's what I will say. You have a great point there. They are guidelines. The problem is people put too much stock in them, but that doesn't mean you don't put any stock in them. Okay, usually polls, just to bring up political polls real quick, they're usually off by 3 to 5% in one direction, but anybody who covers elections knows that a close election, 3 to 5% will sway an election one way or the other. Now, PFF is similar with its analytical data. You are right. It's hard to fully quantify PFF data because the way PFF does their formulas, they can't take into account the amount of help you have around you. That's why a lot of offensive linemen have low PFF grades that are really good linemen. It hurt Jerome Carvin for years. Jerome Carvin had a PFF grade in the 50s often when he was playing, but he was very, very, very good. So I empathize with your point, Travis. Like, that's a great comparison. That's why I wanted to show the comment, to compare analytical rankings to political polls, because there are similarities between the two in that they're overvalued, but that doesn't mean they're worthless. Now, Vegas polls, now I will say, you want to talk about what's worthless, since we're bringing this up, Vegas odds mean something in football. They are worthless in political prognostications. Never trust betting markets for elections. I'm just going to tell you that. I'm not saying I bet on elections because that would be illegal to bet on United States elections if you're an American citizen. However, never trust those odds because they're usually offshore and they don't understand the nuances of things. They understand sports a lot more. But what I would say is this does mean something. And Milton, again, the 11.1% big time throw rate is a big, big deal. And that shows that he can, again, those really, really deep balls, not the 10 yards downfield or whatever, but those really gigantic deep balls downfield, Milton can convert better than anybody else. And in Heupel's system, convert 3 of them, and you got 3 touchdowns. And so watch out for Milton on that. I don't think you're going to see as much efficiency on the drives themselves, moving the ball up and down the field, that you saw with Hendon Hooker, which is funny because Milton did move the ball against Clemson, but he couldn't finish a lot of drives, and that was an issue. But I think it won't matter because you'll have 2 or 3 plays in a game where Milton gets a touchdown because guys are just wide open down the field, and that's going to be a big deal. Now, the interesting thing to me on this is that LSU is number 2. USC being number 1 is obvious. Caleb Williams winning the Heisman. So, and then 5-star Malachi Nelson is also there. But LSU being number 2 is kind of intriguing because, yes, you have Jaden Daniels, but you also have Garrett Nussmeier. Y'all keep calling me the LSU homer, but the data keeps bearing out there's a lot going on in their favor for this year, and this is another one. They're the highest graded SEC team. Ole Miss, by the way, at number 4 is intriguing. That's with Jackson Dart returning. Look, if Tennessee had Hendon Hooker back, they'd be number 1 on this list. Given what we've seen from Joe Milton already and the hype behind Nico. Michael Penix Jr., by the way, funny story, guy that was once committed to Tennessee when Butch Jones was there. He's the reason Washington is so high. Bo Nix is one of the reasons Oregon is so high, and I still have a hard time with Bo Nix. I just can't understand where the love for him is. I think last year doing well was just really exposed to Pac-10 and all of its issues more than anything. I will say with Ole Miss, watch out since Jackson Dart is back because Lane Kiffin actually having a starter returning could make for a pretty big threat at Ole Miss. So that's one thing. We keep talking about Lane Kiffin doing the transfer portal, but Kiffin has some pieces, and Ole Miss is still the greatest wild card in football, but I think they could actually be very, very good with this returning talent. So watch out for Ole Miss, and watch out for – I don't want to say watch out for Texas. This is one that totally throws me off, and I think it's based more on the hype behind Arch Manning. I mean, Quinn Ewers is not a good quarterback. I don't know who could believe that. So it's got to be Arch Manning pushing this. But at that point, I don't see how Texas is so far ahead of Tennessee. It's kind of an issue on its own. And it's actually going to be an issue we talk about in the future, too. Rocky Top Tom says, Monty Kiffin's son couldn't stop a group of 5-year-olds from raiding a cookie jar. I'm guessing, are you referring to his defense? But Lane Kiffin is an offensive genius, so he's an offensive guru. Lane Kiffin, as an offensive coach, may be one of the top 3 coaches in the SEC. I mean, we just can't ignore that fact. So I got to be honest with you. We got to be a little bit fair here. All right. Before we get moving on, portions of the program brought to you by Zen Sports. Zen Sports is a new sports book in Tennessee, revolutionizing the way you earn sports betting rewards. That means no more deposit bonuses that turn into deposit nightmares. On Zen Sports, what you see is what you get. And with their cash rewards program, you get a lot of cash. For a welcome bonus, earn an unlimited cash back 5% on your betting volume for your first 15 days when you sign up with the code HOOKED. HOOKED. That's right. Unlimited 5% cash back. Keep betting and keep earning with up to 3% cash back on your betting volume every month after that. And refer friends to earn a percentage of their betting volume as a cash rewards too. Zen Sports is bringing the cash back to Tennessee. So if you bet big on sports, you want to be betting on Zen Sports. Zen Sports. Betting just got better. When we come back, got a little bit to talk about with On 3 and some, I would say, disrespect of Tennessee football in a way that makes no sense and a little bit too much love for Texas. I'm going to unleash, to quote Skip Bayless from back in the day. Stick with me.
Sun, sand, and salt water, the beach is a very relaxing place. Unless you wear contacts. Ow! Open your eyes to the best the beach has to offer with LASIK vision correction from Campbell Cunningham Laser Center. Ah.
Hi, Mike Davis here with City Heating and Air, reminding you to always dare to compare. Our team provides quality local heating and air service, installation, and maintenance across East Tennessee. We use only the best equipment like American Standard heating and air conditioning for your residential, new construction, or commercial needs. Honesty, dependability, and customer satisfaction have been the cornerstones of our business since 1961. City Heat and Air.
Dare to compare.
Our family has been creating one-of-a-kind pieces of jewelry in West Knoxville since 1986. Each piece is a combination of unique processes that bring your idea to life. Every day in our shop, a truly special item with a story all its own is being manufactured in our facility, bringing the history and family sentiment into a whole new generation of life. We are grateful that you chose us to be Knoxville's best jeweler, a title that we value and respect. Because to me, being a jeweler and owning a jewelry store are not the same thing. I'm Rick Terry. I'm a jeweler, and we want to be your jeweler. Kingston Pike and Campbell Station Road in the heart of Farragut, and downtown on Gay Street right next to the Tennessee Theater.
When you want a hard cider that's easy to enjoy, one that's crafted to perfection, you need Tennessee Cider Company. Some say it's the signature cider of the South. Others say it's the cure to your craving. They all say you'll savor every sip. With a selection of ciders free to sample, all it takes is one taste. Visit tncidercompany.com for more information, as well as to shop our ciders and merchandise online. Thirsty yet? Doors open at 10 a.m.
Welcome back to Off the Hook Sports. Caleb Calhoun here. Another reminder, we don't have a show on July the 4th. Dave will be back Wednesday, July the 5th, so we're looking forward to that. Please hit that like and subscribe button. Portions of the program brought to you by Andy Mason. For the best prices and service in real estate in Knoxville, there's just one place, andymasonrealestate.com. Andy and his partners have been in the real estate business for a combined 40 years. They know how the market works and how to save you thousands of tens of thousands of dollars. Andy Mason at andymasonrealestate.com. Travis brings up a great point. Tennessee sure lets other teams score quite a bit as well, talking about whether or not Lane Kiffin doesn't let people score. And Travis has a goal this year of wanting to keep every single team that Tennessee plays under 24 points. Well, don't know if that's possible. And don't really know if Heupel cares to hold them under 24 points. I think Heupel's fine holding them under 30. But I will say, an underrated stat line last year. 1, I'm counting them now. 2, 3, 4, 5. They did hold 6 teams to under 24 points. And they held another 2 to right at 24 points. So you know, it's not crazy to think that could happen. And they should have held Pittsburgh to under 24 points. There were too many mistakes in that game. And most notably, they had Florida held under 24 points until the last 2 touchdowns they scored as Tennessee was playing soft. They did hold LSU to 13 points. So the only legitimately over 24-point games that I would say Missouri's on that, because remember they made it close to 28 to 24. So that was a legitimate 24 that they allowed to Missouri. It's legitimate 49 they allowed to Alabama. A legitimate 27 they allowed to Pittsburgh, even though that was more the offense. So you know what? I'm throwing Pittsburgh out. The only times the defense last year legitimately allowed 24 points when it was actually an intriguing game was Alabama. Alabama, they allowed 49 points, obviously. Georgia, they allowed 27, and honestly, they could have allowed 40. Missouri, they allowed 24. And South Carolina, they allowed 63. Outside of that, honestly, if you really look at it, like points per possession, points per drive, Tennessee's defense was somewhat underrated. It's just the secondary was so awful with South Carolina. We forget about that. So, you know, and Rocky Top Tom says if Tennessee could hold opponents under 20 every game, they'd be undefeated. Theoretically, yeah, although they still would have lost, to be fair, to Georgia last year if they held them under 20. And that 24 is more realistic. You bring up Pittsburgh was a heck of a game, created the positive trajectory for the entire season last year. Rocky Top Tom, you are so right. So at my old job with FanSided, when I worked for All for Tennessee, before I came here, I was writing in October of 2022. I kid you not. I can pull back the articles for you. I'm going to brag on myself. Excuse me, October 2021. October of 2021, when Dan Mullen had gotten fired and Ed Orgeron had gotten fired, and I looked at Tennessee's schedule, and I knew that Kenny Pickett was not going to be back at Pittsburgh. I said, at the time, Tennessee was uniquely positioned for a red-hot start in 2022, facing 2 Power 5 programs that were rebuilding with new coaches, and another one that wasn't going to be the same with its star quarterback gone. And I actually wrote that the biggest test at the time would be if they could get past that Pittsburgh game on the road, because if they could, then they're going to face 2 rebuilding programs in Florida and LSU with brand new head coaches. They would be on track to get to 5-0, which would build a ton of momentum for the season. Well, that's exactly what they did. And then, of course, they used that momentum to beat Alabama in Knoxville in one of the greatest home games in Tennessee football history. So a lot of things fell into place for Tennessee to have the start they had last year. And look, but Tennessee took advantage. That's the nature of sports. Get a little bit of luck sometimes. And Tennessee, to their credit, had a great situation. And yeah, you're right. At Pitt, then against Florida, then at LSU, a true gauntlet. No, you're right. It was. And on paper, it was. But to get to face a Pitt team in the second week of the season, breaking in a new quarterback, and then a Florida team 2 weeks later that was clearly rebuilding under Billy Napier, and then an LSU team a week later that was clearly rebuilding under Brian Kelly, and to get that LSU kickoff at noon that day, and that was all a lot that on paper they were able to jump to 5-0 without having to deal with the true gauntlet of what it actually was to get to 5-0 with those 3 teams. Kind of the reverse of some other past seasons. Honestly, the reverse of this season, where Tennessee's going to play some teams like Texas San Antonio, who just picked up its biggest commitment in history on the recruiting trail, that were not as big that are a lot better than they look to be on paper. Thomas Doe asked, can Tennessee's defense be better this season? Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it could, and I think it will if you look at the secondary. They added Ricky Gibson and Jordan Matthews, two 4-star cornerbacks, athletes. You can plug one in to start. Wesley Walker is the SEC's highest graded returning safety, had a strong end to the season. He's now going to start with Trayvon Flowers gone likely. That's a big, big deal. Keenan Peely should be able to offset the departure of Jeremy Banks and be a better leader and not get suspended for a fight over NIL money with Hendon Hooker. So he'll be on the field the whole time. So it's very, yeah, they definitely could. Ragged Up Tom, love how the haters like to discredit the teams Tennessee played last year. They beat 6 ranked teams. Look, I agree. Those were good teams. I'm not trying to discredit them. I'm saying Tennessee caught them all at good times, which a lot of football is about that. A lot of football is about that. Good point, Record Top Tom. Gabe Judy-Lally from BYU, another player for the secondary who isn't going to specifically be a starter anywhere, but is a utility guy. So, yes, Tennessee's defense can be much better this year. It just kind of depends on on other things that kind of fall into place. But, yeah, I think a lot of last year, I think a lot of Tennessee, it's not just who you play. It is when you play them a lot of times. And Record Top Tom makes a great point. Opportunistic football is great football. That's true. I mean, that. I don't know if that's not a Neyland maxim, but that would fall under 2 or 3 of Neyland's maxims. Excuse me. I mean, 1, play 4, make the breaks, and when 1 comes our way, score. Yeah, I mean, you take advantage of breaks you get in football. That's how things work. When I start doing our sports history stuff at Tennessee next month, I'm going to tell you guys a story of the 1950 Tennessee-Kentucky game. Opportunity sometimes, like you said, opportunistic football is great football. Tennessee did not have the best team in 1950, but they took advantage of the fact that they got to play Bear Bryant's best Kentucky team in the worst snowstorm in the history of the South. And they were able to beat Bear Bryant that day, and that was why Bear Bryant never beat Robert Neyland. Just an interesting history story. I'll have quite a few more of those for you in the coming weeks. All right, before we get out of here, I want to touch on one more story that I think should anger Tennessee fans. I mean, anger them. We all know last year Tennessee was very close to playing in the college football playoff. And if it wasn't for that fluke situation where Jeremy Banks started a fight with Hendon Hooker and then was suspended for the South Carolina game, at which point the defense collapsed against South Carolina and gave up 63 points, and Hendon Hooker suffers a season-ending ACL tear. If it wasn't for Jeremy Banks starting that fight, none of that happens, and Tennessee probably beat South Carolina. And if Tennessee beats South Carolina, they're in the college football playoff last year. No questions asked. It's them, Ohio State, Michigan, and Georgia. Well, you would think they'd be a candidate to be a first-time participant in this year's college football playoff, wouldn't you? According to On3, no. And I like Matt Zenitz. He does a lot of great work with On3, and On3 is really like the rising site for college football. I'm a big fan of On3 and the work they do. But this list was just ridiculous to me and totally unfair. They named the 3 teams with the best shot at pushing for their first college football playoff appearance in 2023. One was USC. Okay, I get that. USC is in the Pac-12. They almost made it last year. They had a Heisman quarterback who is back. That they are probably the most likely team to make their first college football playoff this year. Another one is Penn State. And it's about, Penn State did go 11-2 last year. They probably have their best team ever. They could maybe, under James Franklin, that is, they could maybe sneak in an extra win. They were in it with Ohio State. I mean, it's not crazy to think Penn State, if they win one of those 2 games last year, they're in the playoff, and they wouldn't even win the Big Ten. So it's very intriguing. If they win just one of those, you could theoretically see them finishing 11-1, not winning the Big Ten, but getting into the playoff. Okay, fine with Penn State. Now I'm going to lose my mind. Texas is on this list. Where is this love for Texas coming from? It is as ridiculous as the love for Florida State that is happening right now. Texas has proven absolutely nothing under Steve Sarkisian. Quinn Ewers is not a good quarterback. I believe he's going to lose his starting job to Arch Manning this year. And I think it's going to come relatively quickly, honestly. I think he's going to wilt beneath the pressure because fans are going to be wanting Arch Manning. Arch Manning is better And Texas is going to have another transition year because of that. Texas, people need to stop acting like they're a playoff contender this year. They're not. They're not a top 10 team. They're not a top 15 team. Tennessee is better than Texas. The idea that you would have Texas on this list over Tennessee is absolutely ridiculous. Can we stop with this love for Texas and this love for Steve Sarkisian? It's driving me crazy. It's driving me crazier than the love for Florida State right now. Okay? They don't belong on this list. Now, two honorable mentions, funny enough, that I would actually argue belong on the list over Texas. What is Utah? That's fair. Utah just won the Pac-12 title. They knocked USC out of the playoff. Okay, I get it. It's basically just playing the Pac-12 slate gives them a chance. The other one belongs over Texas, but shouldn't be on that list over Tennessee. Okay, and it's Kansas State. And the belief is about the respect for Chris Kleiman as the coach and that they could be the upstart team in the Big 12. They did beat TCU to win the Big 12 title last year. Totally fine. I have more faith in Kansas State than Texas because I think Kansas State is better coached in the Big 12. I do. I'm going to say it. I think they're better coached. I think Arch Manning committing to Steve Sarkisian may be the first great mistake made by a Manning because they committed to the wrong coach, honestly. And I mean, the truth of the matter is the Mannings have a pretty good, solid track record of committing to the right coaches. I mean, Archie Manning committed to Johnny Vaught, the greatest coach in Ole Miss history. Peyton Manning committed to not Philip Fulmer, but David Cutcliffe, the greatest developer of quarterbacks in history. And then Eli Manning committed to David Cutcliffe, who took the head coaching job at Ole Miss. Steve Sarkisian may be a decent developer of quarterbacks. I don't trust him in doing everything else right. So I think Texas is going to drastically underachieve. Arch Manning might carry them forward, but he's not going to be starting most of this year. So they should not be on this list. Kansas State should not be on this list. Tennessee belongs over both of them. If I'm doing this list, I'm going USC, Penn State, Utah. Fine with all of those. No issue there. All three. I'm actually going to take but I'm going to say that Tennessee should be on there too. Tennessee should absolutely be on there after those three. It should be those three and then Tennessee. I don't even know who the fifth one would be. I'm trying to think of who hasn't made a playoff yet that should belong. But it shouldn't be Texas or Kansas State. It should be neither one of those teams. Kansas State actually has a better case, but it shouldn't be them. I would honestly maybe even consider a group of five school at that point. I'm not even going to lie. So it's just kind of crazy. Rugged.com, great point that there are too many questions about both Joe and the offensive line. And I agree. I see Penn State before Tennessee. I'm fine with Penn State before Tennessee. I'm fine with Utah and USC just because the Pac-12, whoever wins the Pac-12, when you're looking at first team playoff bids, either one of them, it's more likely one of them wins the Pac-12 than Tennessee win the SEC just because of how much more brutal the SEC is. So I'm fine with those three, but I have to say that I think Tennessee has a better shot at the playoff than Kansas State or Texas. Even with the lack of faith in how good the Big 12 is this year, I think Tennessee has a better shot. Billy Bob Cruder makes a joke. If Vols can hold South Carolina under 63, he'll be happy. Welcome to the message boards, Billy Bob. And I think Tennessee has better goals than that this year. I will say that. But I will also say they should be on this list. I think Tennessee has the fourth most likely odds to reach the college football playoff of any team that hasn't reached the playoff before. Yes, I think Tennessee is fourth on that list. I'm going to be honest with you. And they should not be behind Texas. They should not be behind Kansas State. There are way too many issues with both, but I will say definitely shouldn't be behind Texas. That's just ridiculous. I'm sorry. That's insane that they're behind Texas. And Texas should not be on the most likely teams on the list. Kansas State should be above Texas. I think Texas is the second most overrated team in all of college football entering this year. Number one being Florida State. I'm going to continue to stick with Florida State. They are just going to be a total laughingstock disaster. I'm putting all my eggs in the basket of LSU absolutely obliterating Florida State week one this year. But luckily, Florida State wasn't on this list, but that would be because they've already made a playoff. They made one in 2014 and got draxed by Oregon, who also wasn't on this list because they again also made a playoff. I would consider maybe if we're, looking at preseason rankings, I don't think there's going to be any group of five team like Cincinnati this year. I think that one's a little bit I think it's possible. I named Texas San Antonio, but I think it would just be a little too difficult. But if we're looking at teams, again, Texas most overrated team, along with Florida State, the two most overrated teams in college football. USC, I get. Penn State, I get. Looking at the rest of them, though, it's Utah, I get. Again, I mean, after all these people, like, who would be the fifth? Maybe Ole Miss, maybe Florida, maybe Texas A&M if Texas A&M turns it around. Wisconsin, with the break of playing in the Big Ten West, there's a solid argument for that. Washington has actually been in a playoff. That's the crazy part. They've actually been in one. But after that, I'm not going to see Texas Tech, Baylor, Oregon State, UNC. None of those are realistic. So after, I think Tennessee, Utah, Penn State, and USC are okay. USC, Utah, Penn State are the clear-cut top three. Clear-cut top three. Tennessee is fourth in terms of teams most likely to make the college football playoff that have never made it before. Texas and Kansas State, theoretically, you could tie them for fifth, honestly. But, I mean, I'm looking at them on the same tier as, like, Ole Miss at that point and Texas A&M. That's where I'm putting Texas and Kansas State. Maybe Kansas State a bit higher. You know what? Kansas State's fifth. Tennessee's fourth. Kansas State's fifth. Texas is on a tier with Texas A&M and Ole Miss. That's where I'm at with this. It's absolutely ridiculous that is the case. Everybody should be upset with it. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for doing the show with me. Thanks for sticking with me. Again, we have no show July the 4th. We have no show tomorrow for the 4th. So please hit the like and subscribe on this show. Dave will be back on the 5th, and we'll be back to talking ball. The academic calendar for 2022-2023 is officially over. So with Dave back, it'll be with 2023-2024 underway. And we got a lot to talk about: college football, Tennessee football, SEC football, and college athletics. So everybody, have a great weekend. Week. Enjoy the 4th. We'll be back Wednesday. Thank you guys all for sticking with me on this. With Caleb Calhoun, this has been a presentation of Off the Hook Sports.